I presume that most of you guys vaguely know who I am, and I presume that you vaguely know what our topic of the night is. Could you raise your hand if you've never seen any of my content before at all? Cool. Right on. Welcome to the party. So brief intro, just so you kind of know what we're doing, because a lot of that can be really scary, and it's easy for it to sound like, oh, it's a conspiracy theory. And that is not what we're doing tonight. What we're doing tonight is doing basically a shared process of research. Everything that the media would tell you not to do, like listen to them, they'll tell you what's real. And I'm like, well, I've got the internet, and I've got books. My parents were teachers. I was a teacher for a long time. And we all know how to research things. And you might get things wrong sometimes when you research things, but you can usually tell when you're researching something and it completely does not line up with what you're being told. And one thing we do all know is that there's a lot of money in this world that's very interested in selling you things, right? There's money that's interested in convincing you of things. There's money that's interested in getting you to vote certain ways, getting you to buy products every day. And that money is really good at paying for advertising. But these days, they don't just pay for advertising. They pay for social media influencers. They pay for people like me to tell you, as though it was their opinion, what their opinion actually is not. They also pay for all kinds of sneaky ads that are not ads, but they're subliminal messaging. And so our information space is full of clutter. And what we're about to do is go through the process of decluttering and trying to figure out what's actually going on, sort of from a base principle standpoint. Because when I got started, I thought to myself, what's the most important thing for me to understand? I'm 31 now. I started when I was 30. And I started when I was 0, but it took me a while to pick up a phone. And so I'm thinking I'm kind of a big picture guy. What's the most important thing that if I had to research it for the rest of my life and that I could only understand that one thing, I'd be pretty set up? And I thought, okay, money. Because money kind of rules the world. My little conspiracy brain was if you can figure out money, then you'll understand how these people are trying to manipulate you. You'll understand how politics works. You'll understand how corporate influence works. You'll understand everything if you understand money. So that's where I thought I was going to start, and that's where we're going to start. Then I realized that there was a lot I did not know yet. And we're going to go on that journey tonight of trying to figure out what's really going on, who's manipulating us, and just who's controlling, who's pulling the strings, calling the shots, the metaphorical, deep state, how they paint a picture as though there's this shadowy table with 6 white dudes that are making all the decisions. And it's obviously not that. But we're going to unpack that question from an actual logic-based standpoint with sort of research and evidence and facts. And obviously, I am not right about everything. I don't know everything. I'm just one guy with the internet. And my goal all along has not been to say I know the answer, but to say I'm looking for the answer and this is what I've found, and to inspire other people to also look for answers. Because the one thing that I think I am right about is that we are controlled through our ignorance, and they rely on us not being educated about what really matters, hence why what they teach in school is what they teach in school, and what they don't teach in school is what they don't teach in school. And so we might not figure out all the answers here tonight or when you're out doing your own thing, but you can start the process. And my goal is to inspire other people to start the process. And so I've specifically orchestrated this talk tonight to be half presentation and half demonstration of what do I do in order to do the research, what are my sources behind what I'm saying, along with some pretty graphics and some summaries and some hopefully jokes, because there's some pretty dark stuff when you look at who runs the world and who's controlling the money and all that. But sometimes it's also just kind of hilarious how messed up it all is. So I try to balance that in my own life, because otherwise I would go insane. So that's the presentation you're about to watch. I invite you to remember that ideas are not us, right? Your ideas live outside of you. And when someone presents an idea that you agree with or disagree with, that does not change your identity. It has nothing to do with you. You're welcome to change the ideas you interact with at any time in your life. It has nothing to do with who you are as a person. And that's good to remember in politics, too. There's a lot of people in this world right now that could use this reminder that you don't have to judge everyone based upon every idea they've ever interacted with or every person they've ever talked to. So, starting from base principles, a lot of people think of a stock market as this thing for like trading bros that has nothing to do with you because you don't invest in stocks. And that's kind of true. But in a lot of ways, there's a stock for every single thing in your life. All the chairs in this room are made out of wood. Wood has a price on the market, right? The building's made out of concrete and steel, and those all have prices on the market. And whether you know it or not, those are influences. They're influenced by the market. It's much more obvious once you go to something like a grocery store and you're buying like, a beverage, a hair product, a lotion. It's very obvious that those are influenced by a market, and there's a company behind those that has a stock, although not all companies have stocks. But it goes beyond like physical things. Your education is involved in the market, even though it's kind of indirect, because the government's pricing, the pricing of what makes the schools, like the way that these things get structured, they all depend on markets, and markets affect the politics, and markets affect the decision makings, right down to your salary, your time, your health. Just to remind us all that we get taught to ignore the market because you're not a stock trader. And yeah, you don't need to trade stocks. That's not a good idea. Don't do it. It's gambling. But the markets matter because if someone's committing a crime in the market, they're stealing from everyone at once, right? So if the market is the pooled value of all the companies in America and someone takes $1 trillion out of that pool illegally through a crime, then they have just taken $1 trillion from our collective wealth. Because whether you know it or not, you're paying your money at Home Depot when you buy supplies, and you're paying your money at the grocery store when you're buying groceries, and you're paying your money at all these companies, and all that money is going into the valuation of those companies, and it's all funneling up to the valuation of that market. And so we're taught to not think of ourselves as being a part of that market, but every dollar you spend, regardless of where you spend it, maybe with the exception of a family and founder-owned business where it gets recycled within your own community, we'll get there at the end. Other than that, we're all involved in the market in myriad ways. And so it'll come up over and over. And don't worry, we're not talking about stocks all night. I'm just reminding us that we're all involved. And it's deeply involved in us. And when a crime happens in a market, that's a crime stealing from every American citizen at once, okay? But before we talk about the markets, I like to get the big picture. Rewind, what is a public company? Because you think of a stock, right? People can buy and trade a stock, I bought GameStop stock, I bought Nokia stock, whatever it is. But the point of a stock, of a public company, some human ventures are so big that you can't do it alone, right? If we're going to sail across the ocean on this wooden tall ship and do whatever we're going to do nefariously over there, like smuggle opium or whatever it is, we need to pool our money in order to do it, okay? And so the idea is if we all pool our money collectively, we can all own a piece of the company, a stock of the company, right? And then we can do so much more together than we would do on our own. And the natural thing to think is okay, if we're all pooling our money into this shared venture, and we all get stock based on how much we put in, all that stock should represent voting rights on that shared venture, right? If you put in 1/10 of the stock, you get 1/10 of the stock, you get 1/10 of the voting rights, right? And that's how stocks are supposed to work. Let's be clear that legally speaking, stocks get votes. That is still how it works. It was how it worked then. It's still how it works. We'll come back to that in about half an hour or so. It's very important. And so the corporations started to spring into being as humanity complexified, right? As society complexified. I'm sure that by the way, I'm going to generalize a lot in this just because it's more fun. And I'm going to use Wikipedia a lot in this because it makes way easier screenshots. Don't worry, we are not just talking about Wikipedia. It's a good starting point, and it can get you going, but you've got to dig deeper. And when I generalize, it's because, yeah, you could argue, no, the first corporation wasn't the East India Company. It was this other Dutch company for wheat. You get the idea, right? Is at a certain point, we started to make companies far bigger than ourselves, and we started to collaborate and make corporations. We started to share that responsibility. And it's grown into what today is our stock market, which is extremely different than what it used to be, right? It started out as people putting all of their hard money, golds, silvers, in a place, taking a piece of paper away from it, and then waiting 5 years to figure out what happened with that. Today, it's Ken Griffin has a bank of supercomputers in some building in Boston that is trading at milliseconds, get millions of trades a day, back and forth with literally trillions of dollars of value that means literally nothing because it's just numbers. So just to remind us that the concept of we're all going to work together to make something bigger than ourselves is not what stocks and public companies and the market is today. And we'll get there later on. But the way it affects all of us is in our grocery stores. That's the most obvious place, right? Raise your hand if you've seen any of my grocery store content. Cool. So if you've seen it all, you're about to see it again. So hopefully I'll tell new jokes. And if you haven't seen it all, you got to see it because this is fundamental, and it will change the way you see your own life, I hope, and it will lead to the most obvious and easy solutions that we can all make in the world in order to actually affect change little by little by little by little. So if you went to the grocery store and you wanted to buy shampoo or deodorant or baby food, you would think, oh, wow, I have so many options. Isn't America great? Right? And by the way, I think this is Walmart and Rite Aid and Winco. Those are 3 different stores. And if you thought that you could buy your products from a bunch of different companies and have all this choice, you would be wrong. Because what I did is I started going to these grocery stores and researching who owns all the products. And when I found out who owned them, I would color them in. And yes, like for example in the shampoo aisle, there are 3 or 4 different companies in that photo, but all of those companies have very similar ownership when you look one layer deeper, right? And I'll point out that the shampoo is literally all the same. There's like 2 or 3 versions in the deodorant. Orange is private equity owned, and red is this mega corporate thing we're about to talk about. But baby food is a big deal, right? Because we won't go into it too far, but if you were to type into Google, baby food, heavy metals, lawsuit, you would find a lot of articles about all of those baby food brands, all made by these big mega corporations, all being sued for having found to have extremely high levels of toxic heavy metals in the baby food, which is known to give babies things like autism and other learning disorders, or worse, in the baby food. Same is true of detergent, feminine products, cereal. It's worth noting that the gaps in the cereal one, those little holes, that's just because I was going easy, and those are the store brand ones, like the Winco brand cereals. Those are actually just made by General Mills, and then they just repackage it, so all those gaps are red too. There's just that one little green section, So we don't actually have very much choice. Sauce, ice cream, dressings. I did this in all kinds of aisles. And at the end, we'll get to some resources where you can benefit from this research, and you can take this research into the grocery store with you. Because when I'm coloring and you see my coloring schemes have evolved a little bit over time. It's just you got to keep it fun, right? But in general, red is like the most evil. And what red is talking about is what I call a mega corporation. And I'm going to show you the process of how you research this stuff. And it's pretty simple. You open up your Goog, or whatever your platform of choice is, and you type in who owns whatever it is. Hidden Valley Ranch dressing is my favorite example. Just think in your mind, what company do you think makes Hidden Valley Ranch? And if you know, don't tell them. Don't do it. Who owns Hidden Valley Ranch dressing? I don't know. Type it in. Turns out Clorox owns Hidden Valley Ranch dressing, the bleach company, which is why it's so white, I guess. And you'll find that over and over and over again. Clorox also owns Burt's Bees, right? Not that they founded it, it's that they found that they should probably buy it because it would be good for their business. And so they bought it. And as we all sort of presume, that's happening all across the markets in every product space. And we all know it's happening, but it's a little different to see it happening. So this is your first suggestion, is I would suggest that the next time you're in the grocery store and you're going to buy a product, especially if it's a product that you're rubbing on your skin or that you're putting in sensitive areas, any product that you think might be able to poison you, you might just type in who owns blank. And if you get the name of something that is like, when you get that name, if you don't already know what that is, you might type in who owns that blank, right? Because often this company will own that company, will own that company. And you have to go up the trail a little bit to realize, oh, Clorox owns that too. That'll happen especially with things like organic brands, where they want you to think that RN Knudsen is organic juice, but it is actually Smucker's juice, and they just hide it beneath a few companies. So why do I call it a mega corporation? Well, because Clorox does not own Clorox. Clorox doesn't really exist. Clorox is just a corporate, the whole point of a corporation is to protect the people that own it from liability. So it's its own entity, and we all own stock in the entity. But if Clorox kills you because you drank Hidden Valley Ranch and it was actually bleach, the owners of Clorox are not responsible. Clorox is responsible. So it goes bankrupt, they make money, and they leave and start a new company and do just fine. So if you want to know who owns Clorox, like climb that ladder upwards, you type in, who owns Clorox? And more specifically, here's some keywords that'll help you do it. It's called institutional ownership. Because what we're looking for is what are the big financial institutions that own Clorox? You'll wind up at a place like a Yahoo Finance. There's lots of different sites where you can do this. On Yahoo Finance, they call it holders because I guess they think it's for laymen or something. But you search around, holders down there on the left, click on that. It'll tell you the major holders, top institutional holders is what we're looking for. And you can see, if you read that, it says 81% of this company is held by institutions. That varies, different companies, but usually it's the vast majority of almost every company in our lives is owned by institutions. And what institutions are people like Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street, as well as Geode is a spin-off of Fidelity. I don't know if anyone knows what Fidelity is. They're common for trading stocks, but Fidelity at one point realized we would love to be able to trade both sides of the same trade, and so they spun off a piece of themselves and made Geode, so they would legally be allowed to trade both ways. And I'm kind of exaggerating, but I'm kind of not. That's kind of what they did. Morgan Stanley, FMR is Fidelity that I was just talking about. So these are all, oh hey, Citadel Advisors, my favorite. These are all just these big financial institutions, right? So much bigger than we can even imagine. And just to remind ourselves, this is important to do, right, is that I'm not saying that you don't know this. I think we all know this, but sometimes it's important to stop and remind ourselves they're not wealthy because they have a lot of value or because they have a lot of hard money. They're wealthy because they have a lot of ones and zeros and screens that they allegedly stole from, not literally stole, but they have just weaseled their way into having lots of ones and zeros. And that is why they are in that position. Not so much because they made a good product and sold that good product. Those are banks. Those are not companies that make anything. But Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street are a little different. And I think a lot of you guys are going to be familiar with them, but they're called the Big Three. And they're called the Big Three because they're at the top of every single ownership sheet in the country, almost bar none. There are occasional examples, but basically you can count on at least two of them being in the top three, if not all three. And there's a specific reason why they have so many assets. And it's because actually they have our assets. A lot of you that have retirement accounts will know that your retirement accounts are probably with a Vanguard fund or with a BlackRock ETF or, a lot of the business that they do is actually asset management for investors like us that want to invest in a safe, fund that represents the whole market, or we have a pension, or we have, an IRA, and almost all of those are invested through Vanguard and BlackRock, with State Street coming in third. And so they are actually trading our money. And they get represented on the sheets as though it's theirs, but it's ours. You own those stocks that are in your thing. And this is a common debunk. See, BlackRock doesn't really own everything because they're just holding it for you. And that is true. That is true. The BlackRock conspiracy that BlackRock owns everything is kind of overblown. The actual conspiracy is far more sinister and far more clever. Yeah. And we'll get to it in a second, but just real quick, we'll just kind of scroll through. How frequent is it that these big three show up at the top of everything? Some of you guys won't be able to read all of these, so I'll just quickly read through. A wide smattering. We've got General Mills making cereal. We've got JP Morgan stealing money. We've got American Water Works giving you water, like a water utility company. And we've got Norfolk Southern crashing trains. So every industry, they are at the top. And then I started realizing I should make collages. I should make it easier to see. The food and beverage industry, the banking industry, the big tech industry, green energy and oil and gas, because you've got to control every industry. They very literally are at the top of the sheets for all of the hospice, funeral, and cemetery companies. That is actually an industry that is now monetized, and they are monetizing it. And you can just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper into basically every industry. And the big three are at the top of all of them. And the reason they matter is not because BlackRock owns the company. That's not what BlackRock does. BlackRock owns the voting rights associated with the shares that they are holding on your behalf, right? Remember how we said BlackRock doesn't own the shares, they're holding them for you? But how every share represents a vote? So imagine if in America, you came over into America on a bunch of boats. There's no one in America yet. They're going to IPO America. They're going to publicly offer America, you're allowed to come in and buy this country. And we all want a piece of this stock. We all come over on these boats, and they say, but if you're going to come on this boat, I get all your votes, right? You can come and live here. You'll be a citizen and all, but I get to represent your voting power. And you can work for your wages. You'll own the money. You're totally represented. It's all good, but I keep your voting power. You can see how that would be a little seditious, right? Because if you're living and working in America and you're, earning a wage, but you have no voting power, you are not represented. And suddenly, your elected officials can do things that will essentially make it null and void that, sure, you can earn money, but that doesn't matter if your money's worthless. Sure, you can make money, but that doesn't matter if your products are poisoning you, right? The voting power is very important. And it is in all of the contracts for exchange-traded funds and index funds and mutual funds, all the funds that those companies run. You can just Google it right now on your phone, that the asset managers, the fund managers, they manage the voting rights on every share in all of those funds. And so every single American retirement account, we are giving away our voting rights. And they have tricked us into thinking, we're going to save you money. We're going to make you money. We're going to manage your assets. We're going to make sure you're diversified across the market so you're nice and safe. So we're always making you a 3% return. We are for the good of you. And there's an aspect of that is true. And what they are not telling you is that they are going to just slide those voting rights right over, and they are going to manage the very top of every single company. Because remember, that being at the top of those sheets represents that they have the most voting power. So when that company gets together and says, who should we elect to run Norfolk Southern? Should it be this guy that is willing to crash trains for profit and maybe more nefarious things? Or should it be someone that cares about railways, that cares about the community that we're serving, right? Suddenly you don't get to vote in that. And the same is true for when there's, asbestos in the baby powder. And the same is true for when Boeing planes are falling out of the sky. We don't have our votes because we have given them all away. For our own good, obviously, because it will help us make more money. And so you wind up with things like ESG policies and DEI policies being pushed down from BlackRock. They were not shy about it until they started to get backlash. And then you'll notice that ESG was all the rage, and Larry Fink was mentioning it in every annual letter that he put out until everyone started to make a noise about it, and it suddenly disappeared from his rhetoric. They still do it behind the scenes because they own the voting rights. But he doesn't talk about it anymore, because at first he thought he'd get away with tricking us into talking about it, but we smelled it. So I kind of got more curious. It's like, how much do they actually own, right? Because they're at the top of all these sheets, and you could kind of calculate they have all this money, but some companies are huge and some companies are small. And so it takes a lot of money to get the top vote in that company. It only takes a little money to get the top vote in that company. So I tried to devise a way where I could figure out how much of the top voting seats do they control. And I think I can explain it really, really simply. I scraped data from the web. I brought all the data from the web for the top 100 companies in the country, and I made a spreadsheet. And it collected how much of the markets do they all own. And you can see that BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street are up near the top. It's a little small for you. But I didn't want to just know how much money they owned in the market, because they own literally trillions of dollars. But that's kind of a number that doesn't mean anything. I wanted to know what's the percentage of the voting power. And so I created a system where with every company, if you're the top slot, the biggest dog at the table, you get 25 points. And that's just because there was 25 pieces of data in all my data sets. And if you're the smallest dog at the table, you get 1 point, right? Big dogs get a lot of points, small dogs get very little points. And so if there's 100 companies, 25 points per company possible. If you're the number one guy at every one, you could get 2,500 points. That would mean that you're the biggest fish in every pool in the entire American stock market. More or less make sense? And it turns out that when you do that calculation, out of the possible 2,500 points, Vanguard has 98% of what's possible. Meaning there's only 1 or 2 companies, 3 or 4 companies, what is the total number of points? So out of 2,500 points, Vanguard has 2,463. Meaning there's almost no table in all of the American stock market, at least the top 100 companies, where Vanguard can't tell you what to do. And that chart has a lot of other interesting stuff on it, but I could talk forever about this kind of stuff. And talking about the board members is a lot more fun. It's cool to look at the numbers, but numbers are very confusing. And numbers don't really run the market. People run the market. It's not what you know, it's who you know. Once I did this a little bit, I realized I got to do this a lot because you can find out who runs these companies. The board of directors is publicly available information. And they're supposed to brag about it, right? I've got this great company. We've got this great board of directors. Look at all the experience they have, right? It's right there on their websites. And so they're bragging about all of their experience. But when you start to read what their experience is, you realize, like, wait a minute. They are bragging about some of like the most corrupt, worst things that you could possibly have, because these days, in order to run a company like BlackRock, the relevant experience is not good stuff, right? Because BlackRock is not a great company. And so they've got, for example, so you see I'm zooming in on the lower left triangle there with our buddy. We're talking about the Slim Domit family here right now. Marco Antonio Slim Domit is the guy on the left there. And you guys probably don't know who Carlos Slim is. But for a while, Carlos Slim was the richest man in the world. That's this guy's father. Carlos Slim basically owns all the banks in Mexico. And the way you own all the banks in Mexico is by being friends with all of the cartel bosses in Mexico. Because Mexico is just like that. And Mexico is a wonderful country. And it's not like that means Mexico is evil. You're not going to run all the banking and be the richest man in the world if you've not done some pretty horrible things. And those horrible things are also enough to get your son onto the board of BlackRock, right? And it's important to remember that, like, we don't know all the information there. We don't, like, he's not necessarily just a bad person. He might be a decent person. He's probably done some bad stuff, maybe done some good stuff. All you can do is kind of look for patterns, because they're not going to publish on the internet that, like, yeah, my dad strangled someone because he didn't pay his bills on time or whatever. It's like, who knows? You can kind of just infer. And sometimes it's much easier to infer than other times. And so when I infer, I'm kind of joking, but just let the accumulation of evidence inform your opinion. And your opinion does not have to be the same as my opinion, obviously. I do a lot of this research, so my opinion is pretty skewed towards these guys suck. And speaking of these guys suck, Fabricio Freda is a perfect example. He's the top there. Fabricio Freda represents Estee Lauder. Estee Lauder is a beauty company. If you know about the beauty and fashion world, you probably know about Estee Lauder. They are the second biggest, I believe, in the whole world. They're constantly fighting with LVMH, whose owner is off and on the richest man in the world. And when you go to the board of Estee Lauder, so you track it, so we start at Fabricio, and if I was zoomed out, you could see, then we go over to Estee Lauder. He's the CEO of Estee Lauder. And Estee Lauder is a old European big money family, kind of like a Rockefeller or a Rothschild style family, but the beauty industry, beauty/mob and like crime industry. And once you look at the board of directors there, a lot of them you've never heard of, but some of them you have. My soul wants to go over and point, but I'll show you from here. At the bottom down there, there's a woman in black and white next to that ERL black logo thing. That's a Rockefeller, or that's a Rothschild, rather. Lynn DeForester de Rothschild. The Rothschild family is a little infamous for a lot of things. And then he's connected to a Bronfman, which is a liquor baron from the liquor baron family from Canada that was big in Prohibition. So once you start to learn about some of these people, you start to learn about more of them, and you start to realize, like, oh, if you're friends with those people, then what are you up to, right? And that's not to mention that the Lauder family is famous for their connections to organized crime, and they have a lot of connections to our boy Jeffrey Epstein, who we will be talking more about tomorrow. So you can start to just, trace things around, and that's when you find like criminal ties or like sketchy ties. But I see NATO over there. I see a guy that's a part of NATO. And there's also a guy that's a part of the Aspen Institute, and those are supposed to be like Western freedom organizations. And the more they turn up in weird places, the more you realize, like, maybe the Aspen Institute is actually not invested in freedom, but invested in other things. But speaking of the Lauder family has lots of connections to lots of people. They're extremely powerful. And this is an article by Whitney Webb, who is awesome, and we'll reference quite a bit. But this is drawing her connection, the Lauder connection, to Epstein and his networks. And she posits, through quite a solid bit of research, that it's highly likely that the Lauders were a part of the same spy network, helping Epstein get a fake passport that he was found with, as well as many other connections too. These are the kind of things that sort of hide beneath the surface that most of us don't ever have the time to learn. And so they are able to brag like, we've got the Louders on our board. The Louders are part of this great big company. They're so wonderful, because they're not publishing in the news the fact that the Louders have been working with Jeffrey Epstein for like 25 years in the mega group, along with Les Wexner, doing all sorts of weird things that I've got questions about, but they're not going to publish that. And so it's up to us to publish that. And in the meantime, they're going to publish like, look, we've got this wonderful beauty company, and those people are on our board, and we're on their board, and we're all great people because we all donate to charity. And we'll talk about money laundering later. So here's your reading assignment. If you have not read Whitney Webb's books, and you are interested in knowing how this world works, these are dense, but they are extremely jam-packed, and they will fill you in on the state of organized crime, on the state of the Jeffrey Epstein network. This woman basically broke the Jeffrey Epstein story wide open, and it is the most complete analysis, not just of the Jeffrey Epstein story, which is the Yellow Book, Volume 2, but of the criminal networks, the organized crime networks through the Prohibition era that led to Jeffrey Epstein being able to come to power, so to speak, being put where he was. We will cover a fair bit of the basics of that tonight and tomorrow, mostly tomorrow. But if you're a reader, highly recommend. So, the club. The club is partially composed of these boards of directors. The boards of directors are the tops of these companies. They hire and fire. They decide the big policy. They decide what to do. And those boards of directors are elected by the votes that we do not have, right? So we should be able to vote, does Fabrizio Freda get to keep his place or not? But because we don't own any of those shares, we don't really get to vote. We don't really get to control it at all. And there are a few companies where regular people do control all their shares, and in those companies, they run the company. One example is GameStop. And those guys, I'm one of them, and we run the company. We vote on it, and we kick people out. And there was an activist proposal where a group came in and said, we need DEI reporting. This happened at the last shareholder meeting. A group bought in and snuck this proposal in, and the board said, we recommend you vote against this proposal. And everyone voted against the proposal because we all own our shares. It's like more than half the company. And it got rejected. But that doesn't happen at a company where BlackRock owns all the shares, because BlackRock loves DEI. So this stuff matters. And when you start to zoom out and visualize the connections, they're all connected. They're all friends. And they don't really realize, and this is only what, like 10, 12 of the companies, and it's just connections of like this board member's also on that board, and he's also on that board. And when you start to look at what boards are they on, you start to realize like, the ex-CEO of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is on the board of Pfizer. That's kind of weird. But not just that, Scott Gottlieb is down there at the bottom, and he used to be the FDA commissioner, the guys that are regulating Pfizer. But that's like, happens all over the market. That's honestly very normal. But they sure don't brag about it, like they don't tell you about it. When you look at a place like Chevron, you realize that Chevron's actually telling you a lot about who they're invested in when you look at their board of directors. Because you think about it, you're running a company, and you want to have connections to the various industries that your business is connected to, because you want expertise in that industry so that your board understands the industries you're working with, right? And so it's no mystery that Chevron has connections to BP, but it's also no mystery it has connections to Ford. That makes perfect sense, right? But then it's connected to Dow Chemical at the top there, because all the petroleum products that are creating all those chemicals, like the chemicals that Johnson & Johnson up at the top there, that lady is a part of the board of directors is, Johnson & Johnson's making all your lotion, and they're very interested in being partnered with Chevron, because about a third of the revenue that Chevron is taking in every year is actually from the petroleum products that they're putting into your lotion, not from the oil and gas that they're putting into your car, right? Same with 3M. Get down to CAT, making, big farm equipment. Obvious, Amtrak, Norfolk Southern, down there on the bottom right. But then you get to McDonald's, right? And I think I don't need to say any more about why McDonald's and Chevron have aligned interests. But these are things that you don't really, they don't talk about. The news certainly doesn't report on. But when you look, it's all there. So this is my belated sourcing to show you that when you look up who votes all the shares and all those funds, whether it's a exchange-traded fund, index fund, whatever, on the right, that's what you'll see. And you can go deeper than just the initial Google AI summary, and I suggest you do. But in general, I'm clipping the easy, nice visuals. So they're using our money to elect all these people that are highly corrupt, that are taking multi-million-dollar paydays, that are electing each other, And when they fail at one company, they only failed if the club decides they didn't like what they did. But if the club decides they liked what they did, it doesn't matter because they'll get elected at the next spot they go to, regardless of what they did to the last company. Because the people they did whatever they did to is us, and we don't have votes, right? So if they screwed all of us over, but they made the club a bunch of money, then they're going to get elected at the next spot because they did great for the people that are going to elect them. So how big do you think that all American retirement accounts collectively add up to this year? Just put a number in your head. Think it's like $10 billion? You think it's like $1 trillion? Think it's like $100 gazillion? This is all Americans, what they all collectively have in their retirement accounts, all combined. And that is including the very rich Americans. But generally, when you ask that question, you get the answer that it totals up to about $40 trillion in our retirement accounts collectively. And let's be like generous and say that of the 40 trillion, maybe 30 trillion are rich people's retirement accounts that have nothing to do with us regular people. I mean like really rich. I'm not talking about like people that are doing well. I'm talking like Jeff Bezos's and Mark Zuckerberg's. And so we'll cut out 3/4 of that amount. We still are talking about $10 trillion of our regular money that should be our regular votes in all those different companies that BlackRock is investing in, right? And $10 trillion worth of votes is enough to buy like 20 companies. Like you could buy, it's like Facebook doesn't do what you like, we'll buy it. We still got 9.2 trillion more to go, right? That's so much value that we are handing to companies like BlackRock that they are investing for us and voting for us all across the markets. So we are collectively the biggest shareholders in everything, because technically, you see that pink box at the top? That's the box around all that voting power that BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street are representing. The vast majority of their shareholdings are our shareholdings. And so technically, that's a perfectly good representation of what our voting power would be if we were an informed public that took control of our money and managed it all for ourselves. Or even just passed this act that's stuck in the middle of nowhere because no one's ever heard about it because they didn't tell you about it, where they actually put a law that they didn't vote on because they don't want it, called the Index Act, that said BlackRock's not allowed to vote your shares unless you tell them how you want them to vote. And that would have been great, except that the people that pass the bills are problematic because BlackRock pays them all. So instead of doing what's best for us, which is their fiduciary duty, it is their legal obligation. A CEO of a company, the CEO of PepsiCo, Nestle, Coca-Cola, it is their legal obligation to do what's best for shareholders. That is the law, fiduciary duty. So theoretically, that's written to mean Coca-Cola is legally obliged to do what's best for all of us who hold Coca-Cola stock. Not for all humans, but for all Coca-Cola stockholders. And so if all Coca-Cola stockholders are like regular people, like Warren Buffett's homies that bought it way back in the day, and all of us, all of us that have BlackRock accounts that are invested in it, then Coca-Cola has a legal responsibility to do what's best for us, which is probably not to poison us. But in reality, they all just have a fiduciary duty to BlackRock and to State Street and to Vanguard and to Morgan Stanley, et cetera, right? Because those are the shareholders. We represent 0.5% of the voting power, they represent 84% of the voting power, and some of their buddies make up the rest. And so legally, they are obliged to do what's best for the banks. That is their legal obligation. And so we now wind up at a system where the system was written where it would sound like they're legally obliged to do what's best for the people, because we all own a stake in the company. It's a public company. But we wound up with a system where we all gave our money to a financial institution that gave our money to the company. And then that middleman cut that whole system in half, and now they are legally obligated to do what's best for him and not for us. Right? And he pushes things like DEI, things like ESG. He famously, you can look up the clip where he says, we have to force behaviors. And what he's referring to is like, these oil companies don't want to change their ways, and so we have to force their behaviors by voting them out if they don't, implement green energy policies. And he thought that he was saying something that everyone would agree with, because obviously we need to save the planet from the oil companies. And I don't care what your opinion of that is. What I care about is that he openly admitted, and does frequently in various ways, that all that voting power represents his ability to vote someone off that board, to fire someone, end their job, if they don't do what he wants. And if you have the power to fire someone, you have the power to tell them whatever you want them to do, right? As anyone who has ever been an employee knows. But it doesn't seem very great for us. Because if you didn't know, this is one of my least favorite stories. Johnson & Johnson makes baby powder, along with many other things, right? Baby powder goes on babies, obviously, and babies are very sensitive, right? And there is copious documentation of this scandal that goes far deeper than what I've included here. But the long and the short of it is that Johnson & Johnson started to realize internally that their talcum powder was probably contaminated with asbestos. And asbestos causes cancer. And this was kind of like a growing understanding in America, like asbestos was kind of a demon that was being kicked out of a lot of products. And as Johnson & Johnson internally realized, we've got a problem, they realized that their preferred solution was to just not say anything about it and to kind of like, maneuver the studies and the numbers to just not let anyone find out. Because it's only going to babies, and babies can't tell you like what's going wrong, and they continued that for about 30 years until it eventually broke that Johnson & Johnson had been hiding the fact that their baby powder was causing cancer to babies. And eventually, they paid a $700 million fine. I think they paid a few different fines, which was an ample punishment, and they would never do it again, because $700 million is so much money that they could never recover from that. And they have changed their ways, and they have reformed now. So, happy story with a happy ending. And if you couldn't tell, that's the sarcasm that I use to make light of this horrible world. Because clearly they made billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars doing that. And then the regulators took their cut. The regulators got paid, Johnson & Johnson got paid, and theoretically they fixed the problem. But I don't know, which is why I would not buy anything from Johnson & Johnson anymore. The former CEO about Johnson & Johnson, when that story was finally breaking, Alex Gorski, I think I missed an S in his name. I do not feel bad for him. He's doing just fine. He was rewarded with a board position at Apple and JP Morgan. I'm sure that he's getting plenty of stock that is extremely valuable. He should probably be in prison, but he did not hurt the shareholders. He hurt the people, right? And so the shareholders, JP Morgan, rewarded him for his job. I feel really glad that I had this thought today. I realized, Ian, your presentation is such a downer. And then, believe it or not, I was about to end on that story about Johnson & Johnson and not give you a solution. And I've already got a solution. Like, my whole thing that I've been doing this whole time is there's a really easy solution. And it just comes down to the fact that we buy products every day. We spend our money all over the place every day. And there's a lot of problems, and you can't fix them all right away. It's complicated. But you can start, and it's not that hard. Because if you're going to put something on your baby, you can Google it first, right? It takes 30 seconds to Google it. Your baby's going to, deal with that for the rest of its life. I think every mother and father in here would agree. A Google is worth it if your baby's going to either get cancer or not get cancer. And then, in fact, I can Google it, and I can put that somewhere and then give it to you so you don't even have to Google it. And so for free, if you want, I have a website that's cancelessclothingcompany.com. There's no catch. You don't have to pay for anything. You can go there, and there's this tab highlighted in purple up there that says resources. And on that tab, and by the way, it's not professional or anything. I'm just a guy, and I just made the website. And I just put Google spreadsheets in it because I can do that for free. And you can all use it for free. And so there's all these links in there of just these spreadsheets that I've made over time. Because I don't have a big team or anything. I don't have any I'm just me. I'm just a guy. But, over time it adds up. And so if you click on the founder and family-owned master spreadsheet, actually I think that we're first going to go to the bad one, personal care products ownership, right beneath it. Because this one shows you not just the good, but also the bad. This is what I did at first. As I started researching, if you go into the feminine hygiene aisle, for example, what companies do you find and who owns them? And I started researching all of them. And I put it all into the spreadsheet. And so in red, you have all the mega corporations. Mega corporation meaning it's owned by BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, just like all the other ones. And you don't want to put that where you're supposed to put that. You do not want those up there. There is chemicals for days. You can look up this, just look up the name of the brand, lawsuit. That's your Google search. Next time you're going to buy something that might poison you, just look up the name of the company and the word lawsuit. And that's a good starting point. And there are lawsuits for most of them. And things like ovarian cancer, things like hormone-disrupting chemicals, hormones being very important. And then there's green for family and founder-owned. And in the feminine hygiene aisle, that's almost all female founder-owned, which is awesome. And yellow and orange is this kind of gray area of private equity that is far more complicated that we're not going to go into right now. Private equity can be good, it can be bad. It's not family and founder-owned, though. So Green is the way to go. And then I figured let's put it all into one. So there's also a spreadsheet in there where it's all green of just all these different industries, whether it's baby food, baby formula, candy, cereal. And you can just take this into the grocery store with you and just look around. And it might change the way that you look at the grocery store. Because it's not just about buying a product. I'm not saying that all those products are going to be high quality. I mean, I don't know. But they're going to be made by someone that cares about the company, that hopefully cares about the people that they're serving, that cares about the product they're making. That'll be more true in some industries than others. But furthermore, when you give your money to one of those companies, like for example, if you wanted to buy Tampax, you're actually paying Procter & Gamble. And so your money is actually going into Procter & Gamble and straight up the food chain, like their workers are getting their daily wages, but that's not good. Like there's, minimum wage to a few people, money straight up to the top. Those profits are going into these giant coffers of all their shareholders, the banks, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and then into the CEO's pockets in multi-million-dollar paydays. Whereas when you buy from a family founder-owned business, you buy a drink at the bar, that money goes to your local employees that live here, or it goes to other founder-owned businesses, other local businesses that Mark is sourcing from, or it goes, see what I'm saying? Is it all circulates back here. It doesn't go anywhere, right? When you buy a mega corporate thing, that money is gone, and your wealth has just been siphoned up to the ruling class. But when you pay these people, even if they don't live in your community, they live in a community. And so your money is staying in communities. And the more we all start to buy from founder and family-owned businesses that are not giant corporations, the more, because corporation means the company's not owned by itself. It means that money is going up to shareholders. And in almost every instance, we are not the shareholders, right? And so the more you can learn to prioritize female founder, family founder, anyone that owns their own business, give them your money, that makes a cycle. And it keeps the money down with us, right? Yeah, that's a change that you can make. And it's super simple. And it's kind of a fun game because you'll start to get good at spotting the labels. And at first, you'll spot the label and you'll get it wrong because they've gotten very smart and they'll trick you. It's like you want to buy deodorant and they give you the Tom's label. Tom's is not founder-owned. Tom's got bought out a long time ago. Burt's Bees label looks natural. It is not. Clorox. But it's a fun minigame because you'll start to get better and better and better at it, and you'll realize that all the founder and family-owned businesses, their products all get hidden down on the floor, off to the sides, up on the top, off to the sides where you can't see them, and then you just get Procter & Gamble in the middle. So you'll start to get better and better at finding them, and eventually you won't even need to look at the app because you'll already remember or you'll already notice, you'll recognize, you'll be like, that's my one right there, I'm getting it. And sometimes it's more expensive, but often it's not. Often it is the exact same price. So that is the first part of our deep dive into conspiracy theories. You are all now conspiracy theorists.